And so it was also kind of interesting to get his take on the whole Patrick McCarty thing. But
I would be very fascinated to
yeah,
read that.
It's a good read. Very informative too.
Okay, yeah, I mean he's got an interesting, fascinating reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, we were at DevConf this year, and people who historically have known him as a friend are completely disavowing any knowledge whatsoever of him.
McCarty, yeah.
Like, I don't know that guy. Like,
well, his
share a hotel room with him.
Yeah, I've never heard of him.
You still know him. You might not approve of what he's doing.
Yeah. So I guess he ended up withdrawing, which is going to be costly for him, I guess, because now he has to pay. It's on the appeal. The company, they have a preliminary injunction, and the appeal. I saw that one of the issues was the same. They thought maybe he failed to identify his contributions well enough. Remember
that was the original dismissal. Yeah.
Right. And so they also thought that as well, and eventually McCarty decided to withdraw. By doing that, he had to keep all the legal costs of both sides. So that's a bad day, I would say. And I was curious. He didn't really go into. Farrell didn't go into kind of the why, but it was really interesting.
Because I know you just done.
I was a patent litigator.
Okay, but no, I mean, I know you've done some expert witness work.
Oh yeah.
But that's the only time you've worked with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started my career as a patent litigator for about 5 years, and I actually liked litigation, but the license. And actually, the expert witness thing reminds me. It's been a while since I done it. It's like, oh my God, you're at the whim of the court. You're at the right. The judge sets the schedule as he sees fit, and all of a sudden everybody scrambles. And so, and I think being a small firm, I don't know how you would handle litigation.
Not patent litigation.
Right. And and even just any litigation, I'd be afraid. I don't know the local rules. I don't know this. And liability. I think both in patent prosecution and then patent litigation in general, you're malpractice.
Oh yeah, no. So I still have a rich number. I started as a patent prosecutor, I was a patent agent before I was law school, and my malpractice was probably double what it would be if I would just give up my rich number.
Yeah. But do you do patent prosecution?
No, but I do a lot of university licensing, and so they basically. They have a very complex spreadsheet that are like little questionnaires to fill out.
Yeah.
And I'm in the licensing is the least risky area, but it's still considered very high risk.
Sure. Well, anything IP almost is really high risk.
And I I'll occasionally be brought in to negotiate settlement agreements, etc., which is getting closer.
Sure. I occasionally do get a client. One of the things I do are basically like non-infringement cases, right? So if we get sued and this basically says that we're reasonably going to infringe because of the way we're combining the software or something, right?
Right.
Every once in a while I get a client who also misunderstands that you don't call, that guy doesn't litigate, right? I'm the guy you call in as an expert or as a witness and say, I drafted this. But every once in a while we get somebody who's like, and you'd show up for litigation to defend us.
No.
No.
She's going in a file.
I'm sorry.
I guess I could have gone the other way. I thought that was the way.
Tennille is going to moderate our next panel, improving communications between legal and engineering. Please take a seat. Tennille?
Hi, so I think most of you were here last panel. I'm Tennille Christensen. I run a small firm in Mountain View that primarily works with startups and individuals. And while the last panel was a very kind of, I think, legal and formalistic discussion of contracts and clauses, I think this conversation is going to be a little bit more pragmatic about kind of processes and policies and how these things actually work on the company side. So I have multiple panels I guess I think most of you have been you already introduced yourself as well. Yeah. Okay, we've all been introduced.
We go way back.
Well, and there might be new people though, I don't know, who's not seen us?
Okay, why don't you quick.
Oh, okay. I'm Pamela Chestek. I am a solo attorney in Raleigh, North Carolina, and everybody says why Raleigh, and it's because I worked at Red Hat. So I primarily do trademark work, but I also do open source license counseling, traditional copyright law, kind of everything in that area.
And Raleigh's a nice town. You want Raleigh, yeah.
Well,
Raleigh's
no,
cool.
like how does somebody end up in Raleigh?
Okay.
You know, because I wasn't there, I didn't grow up there.
Okay.
So I'm Jen Dumas. I'm still the VP of Legal at Chestek. I don't know. I guess that's good. How do you like me so far?
And Andrew Hall, outside counsel for a number of different tech companies, from giant to small, and mostly actually working what we're talking about today, a lot of governance type issues and helping companies kind of figure out how to manage open source and compliance.
Okay, so I would like to start off with just a question about whether or not you've seen something, each of you in your professional capacities. And the thing I'm wondering that you've seen is, have you ever come across a situation where there has been source code made available publicly by a company, by probably engineers, and other people within the organization were unaware of it? And if so, were those projects, released by the engineers under licenses that were appropriate? Have you any experience is that worst case disaster where like proprietary stuff was made available, or were these things that actually were probably best suited for open source anyways? So I'm just wondering if any of you guys have any experience with that.
So I haven't been in that situation. One of the things we do set up is the process for getting approval for contributing code and doing that. I actually haven't, luckily, I guess, none of my clients had reported to me at least this idea of kind of going outside the process and just contributing it themselves. I've not dealt with that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an intent and a desire to follow the processes, and so where we have had issues in the past, it's been either confusion about what's proprietary and what's not, or the controls where code might have been released. It's like, oh, we thought this was locked down when in fact it's not. So yes, sadly that is not a hypothetical example for me. And yeah, we can talk about the cleanup or what's necessary at that point, but it was more through a lack of understanding of the controls where it was released rather than the license issue in these cases.
Yeah, and I would say it's a question of company's maturity. So a very new young company is maybe not going to be as thoughtful about it. So I think it's more happening on the level of sort of contributions to existing code bases versus making a contribution without the authority of their company to do that, versus any sort of major like, hey, I wrote this for the company and I'm going to put it on GitHub and see what happens. That doesn't happen as often.
So I've asked this question because I see this all the time. A really common experience of mine is I'll be called in for some open source issue at a company, and I'll, I have a GitHub account, I'll go check out their GitHub, and I'll show up and say, oh, I see you have like 10 repos, and 5 of them have licenses, and none of them are under the same license, and I'm just curious, how'd you get here? And more often than not, the person who brought me in is like, what?
We have a GitHub.
Yeah, so on one hand, I think that's kind of like the worst case scenario, but I'm curious if you guys have actually seen any harm come of this, or if it's really just a surprise and then it gets cleaned up and it's not usually a big problem.
No, I haven't seen harm come from it. I think it's I guess I'd like to. Developers, I think, are fairly sophisticated about what they're doing. They often are sophisticated about what they're doing, and so they're not like completely out in left field to be doing it. They're doing something, that's probably going to be fine. So.
Yeah, and I think the theme, kind of throughout all the talks is engage with the community, and it's perception more than enforcing legal rights. And so yeah, it comes up, it's like, oh, yes, okay, and then you just, you go fix it, or you say, hey, we thought this exception was the reason which, made it be in license compliance versus not, and then the other part might be, that's, and so it's really just kind of a conversation, and the cleanup that we've had to do has been pretty low drama.
And usually I think involves a lot of time cleaning up the process or making the process easier than seeing harm. I think I have seen instances where somebody goes outside the process, but usually it's just about trying to correct it and make the process easier so that it doesn't happen again.
The reason I started with this question is a lot of times I encounter a sense of fear and strong concern from the non-technical people within a company when they're kind of starting to, okay, we're going to use open source, okay, maybe we're going to release stuff. And while I've seen this kind of failure of the processes many times, I've also never seen any real harm, and I think it's because of your point, Pamela, which is there's no reasonable engineer who's going to say, oh, this is the core of our proprietary technology, let me go throw it up out in the open. I think most people are fairly thoughtful and they think, oh, this is just a little widget I wrote that someone else won't have to write next time if they go looking for it, and it doesn't have any value to the company.
Yeah, and as Pam said, I mean, maybe the sophistication thing, a lot of my clients are bigger companies. I actually see it go the other direction where they're very reluctant to even try to contribute, or, you know, they're almost scared of engaging without getting the approval of their manager or somebody. So usually, you know, they reach out to somebody before they just start throwing stuff out.
Okay, and then I was curious about, and there may not be an answer to this, but in your experience in your typical client, you know, procedures, who is ultimately responsible for the sign-off on whether or not open source can be used, whether or not it's going to be incorporated into various products and not others, employment issues, and whether or not they're going to release it?
So I have a strong opinion on that. And the strong opinion is business always wins. So, except at IBM. But anybody from IBM here? No. No, which is, you know, so the legal department has a voice and has a say. I always felt that my job was to counsel people on the risks. And once I got to a person who I felt understood the risks and had the authority at that company to understand the risk assessment and make the risk choice, my job was done. So I've never felt that it was my job, that it was the legal job to do that. I've always strongly felt that the legal job is as a counselor, and it's the business who should decide what risks to take. When I was in-house, I felt that way too. Sometimes you do pull the like I said no, and it's no. No, I mean sometimes you can't use it because you can't get to the right person who understands, or whatever, or they have bad judgment. But most of the time it would defer. So if you're at if you're say at a VP level or CTO level, and they say, yeah, I understand that's a really high risk, but we're going to do it anyway. That's my job. I always felt that my job was done. So I've never thought that the legal department should be the owner of it. I've always thought that the legal department should be in the role of counsel.
We actually do a dual track escalation. So what we have is we have an open source policy, and it's kind of one of the other questions, and flow chart. So we've made it in a manner that's really consumable for the developers because they're the ones who care the most about it. It's kind of a bunch of if-then statements, and then we have a list of pre-approved licenses and then escalation licenses. And at that point, it is a dual escalation to me and the VP of Engineering. Totally agree, absolutely, it's a business decision, but the thing that I kind of bring to that is, you know, understand you want to use this GPL3 widget here, but let me tell you about the perception of customers, you know, and customers start from a place of no open source at all and give me your 440-page list of licenses. You know, so helping engineering understand how this could have a kind of bigger picture impact to the company outside just the technical piece. So actually kind of ironically, I'm the voice of business on another piece of it, and so we do a dual escalation, and so far it's worked really well.
Yeah, and just to leverage that a little bit, I do also, the other thing I also loved about being in-house was, or I thought the critical role of the in-house lawyer was you're the nerve center. So you are hearing, you are informed, you are getting information from different sources that the other side may not have heard. The CTA may not realize the impact that take the GPL-v3 license will have on sales, for example. And so you're the person who's at the center who collects all that information so that you can make sure that everybody is fully informed on it. So yeah, I think it's kind of fun to be in that position.
Yeah, and I echo that completely. Very often, legal controls the process in the sense that it all kind of flows through legal. But with almost all of my clients, once you get a point of a question of, hey, we want to release IP, or hey, it's going to require this, it's almost always that it needs VP sign-off or something like that, because, there is the legal what's going to happen, but the implication of that, attorneys are not really in a position to know your business, and especially if it's a big company. I don't know your business. I don't know if this is good, bad, or in between. And so, as you were saying, it's more about kind of keeping people informed. But because legal's usually the most scared, a lot of times they take the
Yeah.
process and say, okay, we'll run it to make sure it's going through all the hoops, but inevitably there's kind of a VP sign-off or something like that.
Okay. And then kind of as an extension of that, at what point do most companies first loop in legal with respect to free and open source issues, and then in a perfect world, at what point should they?
I think it varies dramatically, and so this is something I've done for a lot of different companies. The best open source policy for your company is one that fits the way they already develop and release code. You have to make the process match the company, not the company match the process. And so, for example, I have some companies where, because of how it just worked out better for the project manager to initially field all open source requests that are not pre-approved, right? A lot of times they'll say, okay, MIT, yeah, we pre-approved that or something like that. But a lot of times we have the project manager field it, then it goes to legal. But again, it really depends on the company itself and kind of how they develop and release code, and trying to get the process to add the least amount of inconvenience to that process, trying to fit it into something they're already comfortable with and already know.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled I'm involved super early at Chef, which is fantastic. Probably, in fact, earlier than a lot of the commercial conversations, which is kind of ironic. And it's worked out really well, because now it's gotten to the point where, as they're developing updates and, the next version of the product, they're like, all right, how are we going to manage licenses? Let's talk to Jen and let's see, what she thinks about that. And so, I mean, the answer always, I think, with when does legal get involved, is the earlier the better. And just how you come up with a way to make sure that you're approachable and you're not the Department of No, and, that they're going to kind of value your input. That's really the pickle. Is, you want to make sure that they want you to be involved.
Yeah, I would, that's, you took my word.
Sorry.
Which,
The pickle? I said pickle?
Yeah, no, that really is, as early as possible, but to me the biggest problem is always, I've been in companies where, the legal department just was this no organization, and all that happens is nobody tells you what's going on, and that just is so counterproductive, that it just, it's sort of silly, so it's not sort of enforcing any kind of when should you come to me, but it is, gosh, let's go ask Jen, because she might be able to help us with this problem. And so if you foster that interaction with them, then you'll be fine.
And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because
Yeah.
the later you're brought in, the more likely you are to say no.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's already a mess.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of want to explore some areas that may or may not be areas of, communication issues in your personal experience. And the first one I'm wondering, do you find in today's open source environment that we still have confusion around terms?
No.
So, things I've heard many times that I literally, my brain goes off and I think, oh, that has no meaning because so many people understand it so differently, or things like, oh, we've open sourced the code, or it's in the public domain.
Ooh, we hear that one a lot.
And I'm wondering if you guys have any other examples of things you hear where you're like, oh wow, it would almost be better if we just didn't say these things because so many people have different understandings of what they mean.
Well, open sourcing is the big one. That one you really have to drill in. What exactly do you think that means?
Well, I see it in commercial agreements from a bunch of, kind of old school big companies, the thou shalt not use open source clause, which is my favorite. Because my first question is, do you know what you're buying? Because, I work in an open source company. Followed by, do you have any idea what that means? So, I think for us, the real challenge would not be opening position in a commercial conversation.
I see a lot of, I think we've all seen it, as well as being savvy on legal issues, developers, a lot of developers are also strongly opinionated on what the right answer is or what the right outcome is. And they confuse a little bit what they have concluded is right with what actually happens or what the enforcement landscape looks like and those sort of things. So there are times when you're dealing with someone and they're convinced, oh, you can link with GPL software and it's going through an API. Maybe not, but we don't know, and so they're so you have to, I think that's a lot of the misunderstanding about what's required or what's kind of the common opinion in the industry and stuff like that. I see a lot of that.
Yeah. Oh, in terms of terms, there's one that's on the mailing list some of us are on, which I'll mention, which is commercial versus proprietary. Like that those are, the thinking that those are, that commercial and proprietary or that open source cannot be commercial. That commercial means proprietary. That's a big misunderstanding. So,
I hear it all the time. So proprietary, though, just means property, right?
well, it's, I mean, proprietary.
It means you're maintaining all of your IP rights.
Yeah,
You're not granting.
I mean, it's actually it's actually not accurate either, because it means it's owned.
Yeah,
But,
right.
which is true of open source also.
Right.
But it is, but it is, I don't take credit for that, I read it on an email.
Yeah.
But nobody says closed. I mean, as opposed to open.
Right.
Proprietary is closed.
Well, and the biggest
Yeah.
one with open source is that the source code is available. This is a misunderstanding I had when I first started, was it means that simply that you can see the source code. That's probably the most common misuse of open source is it's not about what the license is, it's about, you gave me the source code versus binary, that's it's therefore open source.
Yeah, I encounter that one a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I also encounter that one which gets mixed into, APIs on top of services where they have API documentation. And so they say, oh, well, we've open sourced our API, but they're talking about accessing a backend service.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. I'm curious if you guys still run into the traditional fear, uncertainty, and doubt around open source software.
All the time. Yeah. And it's, a lot of times, still, you just have companies that maybe haven't developed a policy or just haven't really taken a good look at how they use open source. And very often, because I think IP lawyers are trained to protect, right, at all costs, protect the IP, don't let it escape, folks will show up and they'll be incredibly frightened about using open source software and all that sort of stuff. And so, in a lot of ways, you have to kind of tranquilize them and help them understand there are good uses, there are bad uses. What we need to figure out is how to make sure we're using it appropriately.
I think as lawyers, we're trained to not trust what we don't understand. So where I really see this is selling to big traditional companies and their legal departments, either says no open source and I have to educate them, or they component you use, and those are changed dynamically. We have a link because they're updated, daily, weekly, hourly. And finally I get some headway when I say our list is currently 440 pages, and I don't we should attach that to the contract, but it's it slows down the sales cycle significantly because there's so much fear and misunderstanding about what that means.
It's super fascinating that you run into it because obviously the people who want to buy your software know what they're getting, but yet
Not
the
always.
legal not always.
No, the people, yes, the legal department definitely.
Yeah. And so
Right.
that's a fascinating.
I do think that the companies that over maybe the past, say, 10 years, it's gone from legal departments who were like, didn't know anything about open source, had no concept of it, didn't realize that they were distributing products that had open source software in it. They were completely oblivious to it. Now I think the legal departments understand it. It has been forced down their craw by their developers, and they're kind of kicking and screaming have had to come into the fold and do a more careful analysis than just no copyleft or like no open source, right? That they are starting to get more sophisticated about their risk tolerance and taking a more realistic view of risk tolerance given their business model. So I think they are being more educated. They are more educated about it and more willing to kind of understand and work with you. Because I don't know anybody now at this point who objects to MIT licensed open source software. That's just like
I do.
Oh yeah, really?
Because they didn't know what it was. Maybe I'm more cynical than most because
you're probably negotiating more contracts than the rest of us, maybe.
and then again, these are traditional companies who don't.
Yeah.
They just don't know it because they don't trust it. And your best advocate in that circumstance is the customer's business person. And that's what you guys mentioned earlier. It's like go talk to your engineer, and they will get you comfortable if you don't want to trust me.
Yeah.
Have any of you run into the specific problem of engineering teams not wanting to be slowed down by legal in their use of open source, and how do you address that?
Try and streamline the process as much as I can. It's always the resistance, and the truth is, if it slows them down too much, they won't use the process, right? They just won't do it. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. If I have to wait 3 weeks for you to get back to me, I'm just not going to do it. And so it's really about getting your process streamlined to the point where you're not inconveniencing them so much. And that can be things like, almost all my clients seem to use Jira, and so if we're not using an open source product and we're going to do open source requests or something, we put it through Jira, because we know they already know Jira, they always know how to use it, right? All those sort of things. So and pre-approving permissive licenses is another big one. Don't take up cycles and waste time on whether or not we're going to use MIT software, right? And so it's really about getting the process streamlined, which is also really important because oftentimes when people are designing an open source process or their policy, they really don't appreciate how this is going to scale, right? And so there's a lot of temptation, like the lawyer has to look at everyone that comes through, and that's fine when you're getting one a week, but what are you going to do when you're getting 100 a week, right? And so for a lot of people kind of involved on it, you really need to be kind of aware of how it's going to impact them, and you try to minimize it as much as you can.
I think also, and I was going to open with this, but I think this is a good time to put it, is as a lawyer, an open source lawyer, I guess now, I know more about open source than 95% of the lawyers in the universe. And I know less about open source than 95% of the engineers in my company. So, I think a lot of this is acknowledging that, and in practice, they know the ins and outs of these licenses, and they know how, where on the license file you put the attribution, and all that. I don't know that stuff. So I think really trusting them and making them be part of the process too, and opening it up so that they have the freedom to do this, and acknowledging that they know more about it probably than I do, for sure in practice.
Right, yeah. When you were talking about that difference between 1 week and 100, I feel like that's something that's changed a lot in the past, say, 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. The last time I was sort of in your shoes 5 years ago, it was okay to recommend a not super heavyweight process, you still want it to be lightweight, but at least some depth was okay, because it was something that was happening once a week. It feels like it's now happening 100 times a week, is not an exaggeration.
Right, yeah.
How do you, you've been doing this a while, how do you see that that's changed for your clients?
Absolutely, and I actually see that for every company that ends up adopting a process is initially when they don't have a process, the developers don't know about it. So they're not requesting to use open source and all that stuff. And so even for the company individually, as opposed to all companies, the requests they field are going to grow. They're only going to grow over time, right, exponentially. And I forgot. So what was your...
is that, I guess, it's sort of like a data point, is that real, right? That escalation?
Yes, almost universally, as developers understand there is a process to use and that they can use it, and as they see it be successful. That's another big one. They request and they get an approval, maybe even for the use of GPL software or something. Once they see that the process works, the requests are just going to keep going up over time, more and more and more.
Do you then advise your clients to ratchet down the level of scrutiny they apply, or?
So we try to start with a streamlined process with that in mind, that this could grow and become very big. We also, though, we go back and tweak. With most of my clients, we'll go back and tweak the process, right? You always kind of make your initial choices. This is how we handle GPL requests or modifications, these sort of things. And you want to go back 6 months, a year later, once or twice a year. How's it working? You get together with the stakeholders. What are you hearing from developers? What are the complaints? How can we improve it? Where are we spending too much time? A lot of times the patent review ends up being way too much. You're just spending way too much time on patent review for kind of silly reasons, so that one gets tweaked a lot.
Well, I was going to say, because we're kind of talking about two different things here. I think one is putting code under a free software license or source license. The other is ingesting free software. I was going to comment that I think that a lot more companies are ingesting much more freely and just taking it off the shelf. It's just components, it's commoditized.
Right.
Plug it in the code, slap the license in the documentation, we're done.
Yeah.
So that's, and that doesn't require as much patent review, but certainly the other way for people when they want to release the source code or Christensen to do something, a lot of times I agree that the patent review process is, and I personally, I want to tear my hair out.
Yeah. Well, it almost always starts out with, every company almost initially chooses that anytime we're going to modify an LGPL library or a Mozilla Public License library and ship it, we're going to grant an outbound IP license.
Yeah.
So we have to review it, right? Yeah. And then it goes to the patent team and sits there for a month.
Yeah.
And also, the truth is if the patent team is going through and looking at each package and looking at it against their patent portfolio, that's a waste of the patent team's time.
Yeah.
Right? And so we kind of come up with tricks. And a big one that we use quite a bit is let's identify types of technology that is important to us, where our portfolio, our core technology, and maybe we only up the review when it's a core technology, right, or something like that. And so again, it's kind of tweaking the process, but a lot of companies will start with, if there's any outbound IP grant, it's got to have this really in-depth process. And then after they've done that for about a year and that's all they're doing, they're like, okay, let's maybe change that a little bit, right?
Yeah, so mostly on the IT consideration. Are you guys being more concerned about the security consequences of this testing? So, and are legal departments getting involved in that?
Excellent question.
Yeah. So I see security driving a lot of the purchase of products. So like, for example, if you look at like Black Duck or Palamita, one of my clients bought Black Duck, and to be completely open, but when they're looking at that, the cost of that, who's going to bear the cost? Is it the legal department? This was very much driven for many years by the legal team. If we're going to have this software, if we're going to scan our software and look for these problems, legal's going to pay for it. As security issues have come up front, it's much easier for companies to go, oh wait, we're also going to be scanning for security problems. So they're much quicker to kind of sign on to, yeah, let's do this. And I've also seen the cost shift away from legal to where the product development is now kind of bearing the cost of that scanning.
Yeah, and what I've seen is there's a really nice marriage between the concerns of the open source process management and the security teams when it comes to keeping very good records about exactly what version you're on, exactly what the license is, when you switch to that version, so that when you get a huge announcement of some 0-day bug that you need to patch ASAP, you know exactly which customers are actually affected. And that's a really nice kind of repurposing of a very well-built open source software process because you can use it in that security.
How would you recommend advising if you're looking to make a new open source policy? If you have back-end systems that are never distributed out, what would be your position on copyleft licenses to protect against kind of future business transactions, either like a merger or an asset sale of the company itself, or some future license or strategic transaction that the company might do, which might get triggered as a distribution?
So I'll give the Heather Meeker answer on this one, which I think is because I think it's a really smart answer, which is it will always be distributed. Just assume from the get-go that at some point it's going to be distributed, because you know what's going to happen? You're going to have a very big, very wealthy, very smart client come to you and say, we love your product, but we want to run it on-prem.
On-prem, yep.
And you're going to say, okay, great, here you go. And that was the distribution. So to cut yourself off at the knees when you're starting, by not allowing by not giving yourself the latitude to be able to distribute and do it, you have to start from the beginning. If you don't start from the beginning, it's a nightmare. But if you start from the beginning, architecting everything carefully, then you'll be fine. So that's that, and I think that's the reason I give that answer is because I think that's a very understandable answer to a business person who's just like, oh, it's going to be, it's going to be, software as a service, it's not going to be a problem, I don't have to worry about it, I can do all this mixing and matching of software, I don't have to worry about it. But that's a very real example of like, oh, and you're going to turn away, mega company who loves the product but wants it on-prem.
I will say we have on-prem software, and we actually have that. So we have an open source policy where we have, a specific exception where you can use GPL3 as long as it's internal, not distributed. And what we've done there is and it sounds maybe naive with that, but I mean, I feel confident that we've locked down that process. It's solely, everybody who's involved with that is super clear that it's internal only, and we have escalation. So if you do want to move it out, and so that's a place, because it's a little bit higher risk, where we're a little more, firm about what the policy is. Is it perfect? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But it's definitely a different flavor of enforcement than we have with our other stuff, which is, pre-approved license, assume positive intent, assume people know what they're doing.
So I have a question that comes from probably not fit for a lot of people because it's more of a nonprofit sort of research institution issue around this. But the issue is that the idea that we're going to make products that are created at the Institute open access or open source is pretty non-contentious because so much of stuff like Caltech would be publicly funded or funded by a foundation that's making a condition of the funding be that there's some kind of societal benefit. So the idea of the open access open source is really pretty normative. But what we're bumping into for legal interoperability, the ability not to use established open licenses, is that these stakeholders still want to assert other things. Like in the case of Chestek General Counsel's office, they want to make sure that we don't suffer any claims against like liability or responsibility for defects, either in the code or in the data. Sometimes because we live in an economy of credit, not money, people may want something more than what the attribution assertions are required for, say, in a Creative Commons or I guess some of these software licenses. So they may want to require notification. Sometimes they want to, because again, we're in the nonprofit sort of good doobie, good, they want to be good actors. We run into like, they want to know if somebody's going to be using it. They want notification because they may want to make sure they're not going to do any harm. They're not going to harm, the climate or, take this data and then use it for unacceptable purposes. So I don't know if there's an analog in your world, but I think this is the major barrier to legal interoperability and the uptake of open licensing and a community that you think, like, what kind of skin is in the game? Like, it isn't about the money. But it's actually the other stuff ends up being just, they're so attached to it as much as if it was something.
I'll feel that. So I think that open content is a little different from open source software, and the reason you've identified one reason. There's something, to me, there's just something different about attribution. And maybe I'm wrong, but the lesson that I would try to teach people who want open culture or open access is, I think one of the most brilliant things that happens in open source licensing, I don't know if it was by design or not, was the concept of equality, and Richard could probably say it better than me in terms of, if you limit it to only certain channels of trade or certain types of use, like non-commercial, it's not open source. And so I think that while there are a lot of licenses that do impose those limitations, and they are rejected as open source licenses because of that. And I think that while on one hand, it is a struggle when you realize that that what you've written may be used for a purpose that you have an ideological disagreement with. I think it's critically important to the system functioning properly.
Right.
So I think you just have to kind of swallow that possibility, and I don't actually know that it's caused a lot of problems in terms of.
It's a proven barrier to both open software and open data, for sure, where people are being funded to create this stuff. So they're under a mandate to share it. And then when we've actually evaluated, systematically the barriers, which is happening through different consortia like Research Data Alliance and the Open Software Foundation, there's a whole bunch of communities in this area trying to understand why the uptake for open sharing is burdensome as it is, given that a lot of the stuff really is funded for, and there is actually a mandate or a contractual obligation to share, and then we'll still see barriers that are very sticky and very hard.
Yeah, and another thing the Open Source Initiative did was there was a point in time where they tried to stop license I can never say this word, proliferation, which I think was also just a really important.
Yes.
They may be ugly licenses, but they work, and we all know how
Exactly.
they work. And so to me, it's not so much it's not the problem with the system; it's the problem with teaching the consumers that it's not going to be horrible, despite their disinclination to allow the use of content in some way they don't like. It's actually not that horrible an outcome, and to just kind of force people along
So I
the
think
path.
having the precedent of the open source, was it the foundation?
Open Source Initiative.
Open source, okay.
Yeah,
then maybe
the gentleman in the blue shirt back there is, are you the executive, what's your title there? OSI? You're on the board?
I'm on the board.
Board director? Yeah, so he's the guy.
So I think maybe that at least we have precedent there around the idea of license proliferation and around the idea.
Yeah.
The more smoke we go, the less interoperability we have.
Exactly, that's a good way to put it,
It breaks the value of interoperability.
Well, and very often you're releasing it because you want lots of people to use it, And if it's a new license, you're wiping out so many people who otherwise would have used it, because we've pre-approved MIT, but I don't know what this license is, so this has got to go through legal, so forget about it. They just won't use it. And so you can really affect what you're trying to do, or the success of your project by doing that.
Given you're working with a for-profit company, they're writing a buy-in and, and developing open source, and these things that are open source licenses, what are involved in the open source time, where do you get overload for processing those also? I'm working for a company where my friend has a contract with the fire system. They don't have to look at it, so they, hey, here's something you have contract with, like, but, the $280 and then $2 for your so, where some of the stuff is associated, but where are the common overload spaces for, like,
Yeah, that's a great question.
So a lot of clients come in, they just don't have a compliance process, right? So for me, that's one of the big ones that, they don't have or don't have an adequate compliance process. So a lot of times we're dealing with that. I think you're absolutely right in that even if there is an open source group, or an open person responsible for open source, they're often kind of disconnected from the procurement group that's going to go out there and sign contracts, or the ones that are going to go out and sell licenses. And so there is, one of the things that it takes them a while to catch up on is that these two kind of need to be connected. If you're going to make open source representations, right, like a lot of times the company doesn't want you to say, we don't use LGPL software or something, but we do. Right, and so it's important that somebody, that you kind of have to teach them internally that if.
I would say a lot of the opposite companies say those things about their company. We haven't actually written that into the way we stuff. So
sure.
Sometimes things don't get licensed, so we actually find a consultant for us, or even their contract says that, or our government contract and our software, or our software is already licensed publicly. Notice, but the conflict of the company or contract is one of the
I think one thing you could do is sort of life cycle, right? Understand where both internally and externally, kind of whiteboard it out, where's the software going to be using, so you can do a gap analysis. You can figure out, through the life cycle, okay, we're going to be selling to the government. The government usually has a clause that they own everything, but they also acknowledge that, background data, or, however they want to define it, you bring something that either belongs to you, or you own copyright, or, however you want to describe that. So life cycle it that way, and then, figure out, okay, we're going to be hiring people, and what are we expecting them to do, and it's no fun at all. But anybody who's been working through GDPR is doing this anyway. So, a lot of that work ties into, I think, commenting back security, and just, data mapping in general, which I think most of us are going to have to be doing for different reasons. So you can just kind of tie it all in together and be fine that way.
I was going to say, and then after you do that, then you have a playbook, and then anything, it's kind of the same thing as the process with open source, is it's simply when you have an agreement, it's, that this kind of term for assignment of copyright, or, who's going to own it, if these three provisions are okay, anything else gets kicked out and has to get kicked up to someone who can sort of make the decision on what's appropriate or not. But then it's exactly the same as you have to have the process. You have to know what's okay, and if it's not, then then it gets kicked out for further review or analysis or negotiation or whatever.
And one simple tool that maybe your friend is probably getting too deep, but order a precedence man. Because if you've got a bunch of different contracts and licenses and things going out there, define what wins, what trumps. Because you can get a government contract that says we own everything. That may or may not have the background IP clause in it, and so if you've got, some sort of order of precedence clause and they're saying, our trade, I don't even know, I'm just making stuff up, our trademark policy, or our T's and C's, or this, and then your agreement, that's also a way to manage those internal conflicts, and part of your data mapping, or, whatever you want to call it, is decide what's most important, or what wins, in case you mess up the other stuff.
Yeah, the last thought I had, it sounds like you were trying to identify places where these conflicts might actually be occurring that you weren't aware of. Yeah. Yeah.
Even though it's still possibly are aligned with credit and
Mhm.
we have no idea.
When I tell my teams, like my new clients that come on board that don't really have dedicated legal anything, the thing I generally tell them about, okay, so you need to start thinking about when to loop me in so that I can help you build processes so you can kick me out. I usually say there's two main things on the IT side you need to worry about, and that's stuff coming in and stuff going out. And so, anytime something's coming in, whether it's through an employee, a contractor, an in-license from a commercial company, open source licensing, and then the same thing. If you're buying something, and the same thing, everything on the way out. And you can start there, because those are the most likely places for the conflict to occur. So, have you guys encountered legal teams being overwhelmed by open source and not having the resources to perform the legal review in a timely manner? And is this something where they just need more budget and they need to hire more people and it hasn't been addressed with sufficient kind of importance? Or are there just solutions to make it more efficient? What's your general experience?
Well, a little bit of both. You can always try and make the process leaner, but I'd say most of my clients, when they come and they help me, like, okay, let's do a policy. A lot of times they want to buy a product and they think, like, I'm going to install this product and I'm done, right? And you really, I think, have to emphasize early that, this is a lot of overhead. Or else, another thing I see all the time is, well, Steve in patents knows a little bit about this, so we'll make it Steve's job. Like, Steve isn't doing anything right now, right? So we see that a lot. So I do think it's important to help them understand that this is a very labor-intensive, at times, process, and that you really need to, if the only way it's going to work is if you do allocate the resources. And for big companies especially, it's hard not to have someone dedicated to this. It doesn't have to be a lawyer. It can be someone, but you almost have to have someone dedicated to the process, the internal open source process, who's just in charge, and that's probably all they do. Maybe they also do compliance or whatever, but you need somebody who's just focused on this.
Yeah, I feel like, I liked your comment, kind of think about it, data in, data out. So, mostly I'm thinking about data out concepts, how are you going to sell it and get people comfortable doing it? So if you can include some sort of overall policy statement is the wrong word, but kind of a description of what our open source does, and kind of a high level. Here's the license, kind of the way it's not copy left, it's permissive, so you're okay, everybody's fine. To sort of help people that way. And to your point earlier, it's got to scale. You can't just hire more people. It's absolutely got to be scalable. So you've got to come up with a way, and there's a lot of products on the market that I think are being built to help you with this as well, if you want to automate that.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I'd ever seen or worked at companies where you could say, gee, we need another body, and they'd say, great, let's get it. Right now, I think so it just becomes, this ever-crushing burden of trying to do more work with less people. And so, yeah, absolutely, scaling processes, having processes, changing your risk assessment, changing your risk alignment. A lot of times that helps. You might start out with a lightweight, heavy-handed process because you don't even know the problem you're trying to solve yet. So first you have to kind of see what the ins and outs are to be able to set up a system for it. You don't even know what kind of system to set up until you've seen some of the give and take, and when you start seeing repeat patterns, then you can say, this is kind of true across the board, is when you start seeing repeat patterns, you say, okay, we can set up a rule for this one. We know how to deal with it, so that you just can hopefully keep re-examining and keep streamlining your processes versus slowing them down. And the other, but then you get into companies, where it just grinds to a screeching halt because they don't have the ability or the desire or too much politics or something going on that allows them to actually get the product out the door. I agree with you. It'd be nice to have a body, but
it's still hard to get companies dedicated.
Yeah.
Only the largest clients that are massive companies that are they'll quick to usually do it. They'll hire somebody, but it's hard not just to get them to hire a body, but just to dedicate real resources to it, right? Like, okay, like with the Steve example, let's not expect Steve to be a full-time patent attorney and also do this other stuff. Somebody always gets kind of jammed with it, and then ultimately they can't handle it, and you got to come back and figure it out.
But Tennille, you alluded to this earlier. I think maybe also start with the question, what's the worst that can happen? Right? Because I think that sort of frames the perspective, and it informs the answer you're trying to solve, or the question you're trying to answer. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, we miss it. Does the company go under, or do we fix it? And sometimes the company may go under, in which case all hands on deck, or sometimes you fix it and you move on. And so I think that helps resource allocation priorities.
Yes.
In a company that's relatively pro-open source, with a lot of young, savvy engineers, putting in place a policy, how do you guys recommend going about the inventory process in terms of seeing lots of different issues using open source. They're a little bit hesitant about legal coming in and having some policy for fear that they're not going to be able to use stuff that they're using, that's going to put blockades on the development process, or that they're going to have to change things that they've already done. How do you get your arms around like what's already in there with limited budget, or find like a black duck? Are there like scanning tools, or like what point in the process do you start doing that inventory?
Yeah. And there are a lot of different ways to skin that cat, right? Maybe you, instead of buying the tool for Black Duck or Palamita, you just go have them once a year, you have them run a scan, and then we go over the inventory and then look at what's changed, stuff like that. There are a lot of free tools as well that you can use. Lewis can tell you all about them. Yeah, there are tons of them. And also, I think it goes back a little bit to my earlier point of it really depends on how your company operates. So what we've seen is where there is that sort of concern, or even when you have a company with different departments that are really separate, they may have different ways that they want to handle it. And so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll push that responsibility down and say, you know what, I don't care how your team lists out all the open source it uses or exactly how that does that, it just has to be done, right? And it has to truly be part of kind of the job description of the project manager or whoever it is that's responsible for it. It really has to become an important part of their job. And so I've definitely, some of the companies I've worked with will push that down and just leave it to the department and say, this is what we require. You know, you got to list it all out so we can provide this bill of materials, open source bill of materials, do this sort of stuff. How you do it, it's up to you.
And I think this actually ties back in with the security question, which is it's a lot easier battle now to say you got to tell me everything in the software now that there's so much concern about security, about software security. So it's for someone to say, oh, like I don't know what's in there, just is not an acceptable answer anymore.
Well, and I'll say we lived this, so you know we went through that, and I don't know, our team did it internally. They built some magic, and you know, and it started out as super manual, and really the impetus for it originally was customers asking for it. So you know, sometimes you do need a forcing function on, you know, and it kind of goes to the point you just made. It's got to happen, you know. Thankfully, it you know, it sounds like maybe you have a lot of smart developers who you know build software for a living, so maybe it's something they can build inside. Because I think it was relatively drama free at the time it happened. Yeah. Maybe that's just.
And I have had clients who've built tools that just scrap the whole source code base for the word license, and that alone pulls out a non-trivial portion of the files that are necessary to know what. Yeah, or like a lot of them will adapt. Fossology is a scanning tool that's a free and open source tool. That's a great one. I mean, there are a lot, like I said, there's a lot of ways to skin it, right? It's just about finding the right one for your company. And there's probably someone within your organization who is pretty ideologically in line with wanting to be in compliance.
Yep.
And that person can probably write a script that does a lot of the work.
And those are great people a lot of times for resources to get involved in the kind of your open source compliance because they believe in it, right? They want it to happen. Because a lot of the people, this stuff is being applied to them, right? And they kind of don't want to do it, it's more work, it's resist. But if you find someone who kind of philosophically agrees with doing that, I find a lot of time those people are a great resource to help you kind of push the process internally.
They become a strong advocate.
Yeah.
And that, you know, opens up kind of the whole point of this panel is there's your partnership with engineering. That, you know, opens up a lot of other doors.
And if it's not obvious, start with the product that goes out the door. Don't worry about the, you know, whether or not they have, you know, open PDF reader on this. They're using Mozilla.
Exactly.
Don't worry about that. Mozilla's fine with the, you know, on the desktop. Fine, totally fine. Right.
I was wondering if any of you have personally experienced conflicts between individuals at companies that have different free and open source goals than the company itself. And if you have, share some anonymized details.
So I will say that I worked at Red Hat, and no, but just in terms of, I mean, one of the things that was fascinating to me about working at Red Hat, it was you just had this whole range of developers from very pragmatic to very ideological, and so trying to, you know, just it was always fascinating to me. My most fascinating ones were people who were just trying to figure out how to observe proprietary copyright-like rights in order to make money for the company, because they're a product manager, whatever, and their job was to monetize this thing that there were no proprietary rights for. And so they were just like, this one memorable person who I just would spend hours in my office. But, so I would not have put him on the ideological side of it. But then there are some who are just so highly ideological. There's a very famous person who very vehement in his disagreement with Stephen about the way that Red Hat does things. So it was, I mean, it was fascinating. It was just really fascinating because I just had the whole range of them. So it was good fun. I don't know if I had the solution to that, but it's the whole gamut.
Yeah, again, it goes back, I mentioned it earlier today, so, we started as an open source company and then built a commercial offering. So there were a lot of developers who were, shocked and appalled, and a lot of members of our community who were shocked and appalled by that. So, we really had to balance that, and through that process, to be respectful and, understand the feedback of those people. Some didn't stay. Some, Chef was no longer the right place for them to work when they started building a commercial or proprietary offering. But that said, we've come up with other ways to do it. We still have open source projects for people who are, find commercial proprietary to be most disgusting, mostly work on the open source projects, but they understand that if we need them, that's kind of part of working at the company.
Yeah, I definitely see it quite a bit. For some reason, embedded Linux seems to bring a lot of that with it, where, the device companies that are shipping Linux, you'll get some internal kind of GPL Linux advocate who really will get upset by the fact that you're not enabling them to replace the code or something and do stuff like that. I think what you hit the nail on the head, you have to listen to them and understand where they're coming from, acknowledge their feelings, and a lot of times explain, I understand where you're coming from. This is kind of the policy we've adopted as a company, that tries to factor in all these different people's opinions, and this is kind of where we're at, so this is how we have to operate, but I think you need to hear them. I think it's always important to hear them, if nothing else, because if they feel blown off, they might become a whistleblower, which is a bigger headache, right?
Do you guys have any experience on the receiving contribution side with getting either CLAs or copyright assignments, and can you talk about that?
So on behalf of a client receiving CLAs?
We moved from CLAs to DCOs about a year and a half ago. So everybody knows CLA, DCO?
Just try it.
Okay, so CLA is just like, it's a standard license, contributor license agreement. I don't know if there's more than one. We use the one from the Apache Foundation, so I don't know if there's other ones out there.
There's like 27. Right?
Okay, and and we really had a challenge with that, because even though, as a lawyer, I certainly felt like it was very lightweight and non-controversial and inoffensive, a lot of people had a real hard time with it. Like, why are you making me do this? And I don't want to tell you my name. I just, I don't want to tell you who I am. And we had a lot of pushback on that. And this is so corporate and, big, bad company. And so in October 2016, we moved to the Developer Certificate of Origin, which is just basically a way to make an attestation, that's the word you can't say, that's my word, in the code saying I'm either the copyright owner or I have the right to contribute this. And it seems like it's, a lot more lightweight and a lot more acceptable to developers. Again, going back to kind of speak their language rather than forcing a legal process onto developers. That said, we have plenty of people who are unhappy with that. But it's definitely been a lighter process, and I think overall positive. And as a company, and in terms of compliance and security and all those things, we haven't missed a beat. So I haven't seen any negative repercussions from making this decision. That's great.
And I think like Pam was saying earlier, a lot of times we're here to inform and make sure that you're making an informed decision. And so a lot of times we'll talk with the company about whether to adopt CLA, right? You go through that, well, okay, we're probably going to see fewer contributions if we go this route, because some people are going to object to it, these sort of things. And here's the benefit, here's the potential licensing nightmare.
Right.
Do we see that happen very often? Kind of walk them through all of that. Once they've decided they want to do a CLA, I really try and steer them to the Apache software, Google, because for the same reason we don't like license proliferation, right? If somebody's going to have to reread or figure out your CLA as opposed to going, oh yeah, this is the Apache Software Foundation CLA, I remember this, we've already approved this. It's gonna throw a wrench in the process.
So at what point did using the DCO switch from proliferation to necessity?
That's at the point we decided to do it. great question, and that was part of the analysis, right? And, you know, in our blog post, you can see, we decided kind of what somebody mentioned earlier today, if Twitter and Facebook do it, then maybe that makes it more acceptable. And, you know, we listed a bunch of leading companies that had opted for this process. We clarified that it's not just for Linux, and, yeah, I don't know.
So you just reminded me of something that's not at all on the panel, but I've been struck by it a couple times at this conference, which is so much of what we bring to the table is analyzing these open source like norms as if they're kind of that extrinsic stuff around the contract that is often used in contract breach negotiations, or, you know, when you're like trying to figure out, well, that wasn't part of the actual words, but everybody's doing this. And so, you know, it seems like this, I think for the CDOs, for example, you know, if you look at it and you try to apply a purely legal analysis to it, you're not getting any rights under any regime that like we as lawyers understand. But once you have kind of critical mass, it just becomes the standards and norms, and it's like, you know, shipping law. Like, a lot of the papers used in shipping law don't have, like, actual legal meaning, but everybody knows you need this bill and this receipt over here to make things work.
Yeah.
So I wish I could remember, I heard Karen Copenhaver, who counsels the Linux Foundation, was instrumental, I believe, in the DCO, talk about why it was adequate versus a CLA, and she kind of tore apart a CLA in every aspect of it and why it was just really not helpful anyway. So why are we putting this unhelpful, you know, this thing that makes the lawyers feel okay, but actually doesn't do anything? And I wish I could remember everything that you said, but one of the points is, are you really going to sue that developer anyway?
Yep.
So they make a misrepresentation, they don't have the right, like, are you really going to, what are you going to do? You're not going to go after them. So, you know, so just the you know, the burden of doing that was so outweighed the true benefit that you were getting versus the one that we who like to have paper signed think we're getting, just made it just not worth it. So this is a really interesting concept.
I gotta admit, I'm thrilled and relieved to hear you both say that. Even though we did it, it's still nice to hear it. It's a little affirmation.
All right, so we have exactly 1 minute left, and I think we can get through both your questions. Karen.
Karen Copenhaver, Copenhaver,
and then in the back.
I was going to comment that the companies manage a lot of outbound stuff. There are actually fundamentally CLAs out there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they have the same name locations.
Yeah.
The one you used to have, which you don't have anymore, didn't give you any more rights to engage to the rest of the community.
Yeah.
But there are lots and lots of CLAs that do. They allow relicensing under other licenses and other kinds of permissions. Don't go as far as copyright assignments, but there's certainly more than just I'm giving this to you under the CLA. So it's unfortunate, but those are there's a ridiculous number of those still out there.
All right, I think that concludes our panel. Thank you all very much for coming.
Great. One is for all the panels that will happen until 4 p.m. So please can talk and complete the evaluation. And third one is for the last talk, the elimination of bias talk. So please complete the evaluation. We need them for the talk that we want.
And the one other thing that comes to mind just before I forget,
the whole, I'm our picture of a trade alliance. This is the international, membership organization for looking at, how we remove barriers, sharing research data to make the world better, making sure that
I'm gonna run fast.
the idea being that we can't go inside, solve societal problems, So, as part of our effort, we issued, everyone was our data economy, a whole bunch of national apps around, legal interoperability. Data, and the definition of research data is very non-code, if anything that's used to avoid, So we've been issued a set of, guidelines and recommendations for interoperability, and, but now we're realizing that, we really need to choose software because, data, people are gonna argue that those are
Well, a lot of them are.
particularly in Europe.
yes, I've heard that so.
Yeah, you should. So I mean, we share some of the same common communities. Software. Yeah, we can make an argument, maybe just the compilation are not, there's all sorts of.
There's a lot of nuance, and it's not copyrighted software is certainly not standardized exactly, but ultimately principles are roughly the same. Whereas between bytes per year and various data protection rules in the EU. But when EU makes roads out of
Exactly.
that's the good side.
Exactly. Members that really have really different, realities, also the world.
Right.
So when we talk about attribution, we don't give a crap about moral liability so much. For visual artists, right? And then you have other countries where you can never, so one of our recommendations to remove
And in just general,
is,
like, 10 years ago, most people didn't know what they didn't know about it. I feel like now, at least most didn't have,
Which means they haven't actually read CC0, but
no,
like,
they don't know. Right. And so they can continue to say, oh, wait a minute, this might be a problem. More or less.
So we understand that because we've had people like Diane Peters and then,
Talk about it.
really cool Creative Commons guys from Australia, Baden Broad.
Oh, I know of him, but I know Diane very well.
So, there's that.
How are we gonna?
So we're trying to really understand what the reality is. And now we have NIH coming up with NIH actually funding the Northeast Data Hub to look at people that want to go libraries and make it easier. And we have the same funding agencies that are mandating public access funding to figure out how we can
Portability
and the upshot is that building out.
I think I said mono earlier. Mono is open source version of the
I don't know, I think too much shirking. Too much shirking.
There's a lovely, lovely blog post. When I told the new startup, when I told our community like first piece of cards, they're like around right, yeah.
I think that
It was a really nice,
It's a beautiful class of presentation with analysis of one university and attempting to do a license analysis.
Oh, I know.
The benefit of mine was that it was running a lot like bicycles. Bicycles were supported by them. It was really good in emergency. And so I was wondering if that was going to be murdered away because the open there are short. I don't know how much it really costs. No, so really they were like open source competitors. They were almost like open GDK versus
judgment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, she hasn't told us the time to go, so you can keep chatting with us.
Or we could, we have 2 minutes.
conversation is more interesting. I wanna know what you guys are talking about.
Oh, yeah, what the fancy folks are talking about, principals,
We always have better principals.
well, yeah. Specifically the enforcement principals.
You meant the
Okay, we're starting 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I guess.
I guess so, I don't know.
Okay, Louis is going to guide us as we discuss, enforcement and compliance.
Okay, so that's, we couldn't tell if the title of this was compliance or enforcement.
Yeah, so.
So we just add an and in between, and now you get both. Which I think does tell us something about sort of the state of, like, where things are, right? Like that compliance with licensing, enforcement with licensing